Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and unpack why the most famous financial milestone in modern history is, well, actually a massive trap. We're going to look at one of the biggest, quietest disappearing acts in modern economic history. And to truly understand this illusion, I want to start by looking at a guy named Kevin. Let me give you the breakdown. Kevin makes $95,000 a year today. His father made $38,000 a year back in 1985, doing the exact same job at the exact same company. By absolutely every headline measure we have, Kevin is crushing it, right? He has nearly triple the paycheck his dad had. He's got a better title, a nicer car, a brand new leased crossover instead of his dad's old rusty station wagon. And yet, here's the kicker. Kevin cannot afford the house his father bought on that $38,000 salary. He cannot even imagine retiring at 62 the way his father did. And he honestly spends more of his month just trying to stay afloat than his father ever did. So what happened? Somewhere between his father's paycheck and his own, something just disappeared. And it wasn't the money itself, it was the thing the money used to buy you, a stable, secure place in something called the middle class. Here's the really uncomfortable truth that nobody in charge ever wants to say out loud. The middle class, the one your parents grew up believing in, the one basically built into the American dream itself, it doesn't really exist anymore, not in the way it used to. It's not that the term vanished, it's that the thing it was describing quietly hollowed out from the inside while everyone just kept using the exact same word for it. My name is Nick, and I spend an unreasonable amount of time studying what actually happened to the financial middle ground that everyone just assumed would always be there. If you want to understand what really replaced it, hit subscribe, because today we're taking apart this massive illusion. Let me ask you something. When you picture the middle class, what pops into your head? It's probably a single-income household that could still easily afford a house, 2 cars, regular family vacations, and a retirement that absolutely didn't require picking up a second job. But that image? It's doing a lot of heavy lifting in your head. That image is largely just a snapshot of a very specific 30-year window in American history. It's not a permanent economic law. We were told the middle class was the default setting of a healthy economy. Actually, scratch that. It wasn't the default, it was a total historical exception, and that exception is over. Think about it like a wide, comfortable bridge that used to connect working paycheck to paycheck on one side to being financially secure on the other. For decades, that bridge was wide enough that most people doing perfectly ordinary jobs could just walk across it in a single generation. Buy the house, raise the kids, retire with a pension, hand something down. The whole shebang. That bridge is still technically standing today, but it's been narrowed down to a single lane, the guardrails have been quietly removed, and the toll to cross it went up infinitely faster than most people's paychecks ever did. Some people still make it across, for sure, but the bridge that used to fit an entire generation now only fits a fraction of one. And this hollowing out, it completely shatters the financial milestones we were all taught to chase. To see how this plays out in real life, we start with Sarah. Sarah just hit this exact 6-figure number in her retirement account. $100,247. And she was completely shocked to realize she felt absolutely nothing. I mean, think about this. She had been working toward this precise moment for years. Literally years of skipping vacations, saying no to expensive dinners out with her friends, and diligently tracking every single penny on a color-coded spreadsheet. Finally, she got the magical notification on her phone. She took a screenshot, she almost texted her sister to celebrate the massive win, and then she just sat there, looking at the screen, waiting to feel it. She was waiting for that massive whoosh of arrival, that deep, overwhelming sense of finally making it that we are all culturally promised. But instead of fireworks and celebrations, she felt a brief flicker of excitement, and then she immediately opened her checking account app to see if she could actually afford to put 4 new tires on her car before winter hit. In that exact moment, the triumphant feeling just evaporated completely. Gone. Something is deeply, structurally wrong with that picture. And the most important thing to realize right from the start of this explainer is that it is not Sarah's fault. Sarah did everything right. The problem is the number itself. For decades, we've inherited this incredibly powerful cultural myth from movies, television, and, well, everyday financial influencers that hitting 6 figures means you finally made it to the promised land. It is drilled into our heads from the very moment we open our first high school savings account, isn't it? Think about the messaging we're constantly fed. We see it in 1990 sitcoms where characters somehow afford massive, sprawling New York City apartments on absolute entry-level salaries. We see it online today with modern financial influencers constantly shouting about the absolute necessity of a 6-figure morning routine. 100 grand in the bank, 100 grand salary, 100 grand net worth. It is the number every single piece of conventional career advice uses as the ultimate gold standard. And I get it, it feels wonderfully clean. It feels like a massive life milestone wrapped up in a neat little bow. But here's what nobody is telling you. That number simply does not mean what it used to mean, and for a huge portion of the population today, it barely means anything at all. We have been taught to blindly worship a metric that has quietly lost all of its power, and we are going to take apart this illusion piece by piece so you can clearly understand what your money actually represents in the real world today.
Section 1. The six-figure illusion. Let's look at why this is such a dangerous psychological trap.
To really understand the trap, you first have to realize that $100,000 isn't a threshold the universe respects. Mathematically speaking, there is no fundamental economic law stating life suddenly gets magically easier the moment your balance ticks from $99,999 to $100,000. It is just a threshold our brains respect purely because of its symmetry, and this comparison brilliantly illustrates the real problem. You're looking at a 40-year-old picture frame, but the buying power inside it has quietly shrunk. The gold lettering on the frame still clearly says $100,000 equals wealthy, but the picture inside it, what that money actually buys, has been shrinking fast. Let's bring this back to the middle class disappearing act we talked about earlier with Kevin. The middle class wasn't destroyed by one dramatic event, right? There's no single villain, no one stock market crash you can point to and say, there, that's when it broke. What actually happened is that three separate quiet forces worked against the same group of people for roughly 4 decades. Stacked together, they hollowed out the entire structure. The first force is one most people have a vague sense of, but rarely see the actual numbers on. Wages stopped moving with productivity. For most of the mid-20th century, as workers produced more, got more efficient, and generated more value for their companies, their paychecks grew right alongside that productivity. That relationship held strong for decades. Then, starting around the late 1970s, it just quietly snapped. Productivity kept climbing. Paychecks, adjusted for what money could actually buy, mostly flatlined. Since then, productivity has grown by roughly 80%, but typical worker pay, it's grown by a tiny fraction of that. The pie got bigger, but the slice going to the people baking it got much smaller. That gap went straight to corporate profits and executive compensation. Now the second force is one almost nobody talks about in the same breath, but it's arguably done even more damage. The cost of the specific things that define middle-class life grew dramatically faster than everything else. Overall inflation looks moderate on paper, but break it down by category and it's terrifying. Housing, healthcare, and higher education, the three things that basically define whether you can build a middle-class life, have grown far faster than wages. College tuition has grown by several multiples faster than typical earnings since the 1980s. Healthcare costs have consistently outpaced wage growth for decades. So $100,000 in the 1990s could put a serious life-changing down payment on a house almost anywhere in the country. $100,000 today in many major cities, it barely covers the closing costs, a few months of emergency runway and the moving trucks to get you there. It is the exact same number, but with wildly different power.
Section 2. The invisible wealth thief. Let's talk about the third force causing this quiet erosion.
Now let's move to that third force, the one actually shrinking your buying power minute by minute. This force is far more dangerous than a stock market crash because it happens in total, absolute silence. Look, when the stock market drops, you get an alert on your phone, right? It makes the evening news, you feel a sudden sense of panic and urgency, and you log right into your accounts. It's loud, and because it's loud, you can actively react to it. But the erosion of your buying power, it doesn't send you a single notification. Nobody taps you on the shoulder to say, hey, just a heads up, the money in your account is worth less today than it was yesterday. If you have your $100,000 and inflation runs at a completely normal, boring 3% a year, something terrifying happens over time. 3% doesn't sound like a massive emergency. It is the kind of background noise inflation rate that economists generally consider healthy. But human psychology is terrible at assessing background noise. Ask yourself a simple question. Would you let a thief steal 3% of your entire net worth every single year if they sent you a physical receipt in the mail? Of course not. You'd be outraged. You'd call the police. But inflation doesn't send receipts.
When you apply that slow, boring 3% to a stagnant pile of cash over a long period, the math reveals a completely different story. The screen is going to continue to read $100,000, totally deceiving you into feeling secure, while the foundation is actively rotting away right underneath your feet. 20 years from now, that untouched $100,000 will only have the buying power of $55,000 today. It will be quietly eroded without you ever noticing a single drop on your screen. Think about the gravity of that for a second. That is almost half of your wealth simply wiped out by time. Just gone. And here is the real tragedy of it all. Nothing dramatic happened. You didn't make a bad investment in a super risky startup. You didn't fall for some crazy online scam. No one physically broke into your house and stole your cash. You simply let the money sit there in a supposedly safe account, admiring the wonderfully round number while time took a massive bite out of it every single year. You only notice it when you go to buy the exact same groceries or pay for the exact same services, and somehow, inexplicably, they cost more. This is the ultimate danger of treating a round number as a safe harbor.
Section 3. The price of complacency. How we turn a temporary rest stop into a permanent parking spot.
To really grasp the price of complacency, we have to look at the psychological trap of hitting this number. The real danger of the six-figure illusion isn't just inflation. It's what the number physically does to your brain the exact moment you achieve it. Crossing it triggers deep complacency. You relax your shoulders, mentally check the box that says financial security achieved, and you just stop driving forward. Let's look at the math between two people who hit the milestone at the exact same age. Person 1 parks it safely, while person 2 puts it to work in index funds. Imagine two people who both save $100,000 by their 30th birthday. Person 1 feels a massive sense of accomplishment, puts the money in a standard savings account, and calls it a day. Done. Person 2 takes that exact same $100,000, recognizes it as raw material rather than a shiny trophy, and invests it in broad index funds. This is an absolutely crucial distinction. They view the money as a tool to be deployed, not a finish line to be celebrated. Fast forward 20 years. Person 1 is sitting on that same shrinking account, now worth about $55,000 in real terms. Person 2, assuming a historically modest 7% average return, is sitting on roughly $387,000. It is the exact same starting number and the exact same amount of time passed. The only difference in the world was how they viewed the milestone.
That right there is the massive gap. A nearly $330,000 penalty for believing a number is a destination instead of a beginning. That isn't just a slight competitive edge or some minor rounding error on a spreadsheet. That is a truly life-altering amount of money. I mean, think about what $330,000 actually buys you in the real world. That is the difference between having the total freedom to retire a full decade early to travel the world versus being forced to grind it out at work well into your 70s. It is the difference between paying for your children's college education entirely in cash so they start life totally debt-free versus forcing them to take out massive, crippling loans. It is the leverage you need to confidently walk away from a toxic boss or a soul-crushing career without a second thought. That gap represents your real-world options. And losing it? That is an enormous, invisible tax that you pay simply for adopting a flawed cultural mindset about what a round number actually means. And notice how this complacency trap actually works in practice. People hit the milestone and immediately start leaking wealth through 100 small, heavily justified lifestyle upgrades. It rarely happens all at once, you know? People don't hit six figures and immediately go out and buy a luxury yacht or a private island. Instead, they do something much more subtle, much more common, and frankly, far more insidious. They do a full recalibration of what their normal spending looks like. They upgrade their car lease to a premium model because, hey, they've worked hard and they've earned it, right? They move to a slightly nicer apartment with better amenities. The dinners out that used to be a very special occasion suddenly become the absolute standard. What used to be a celebratory Friday night steak dinner morphs into ordering $60 premium sushi delivery on a random Tuesday, simply because you don't feel like cooking and you quietly tell yourself, well, I am a six-figure earner now. Every single one of these individual decisions feels entirely reasonable and completely deserved in the moment. But collectively, these small, constant leaks completely halt the financial momentum that got them to the milestone in the first place. Within a couple of years, the balance hasn't grown at all, and they sit there completely bewildered, unable to figure out why they still feel totally broke despite having the supposedly magic number in their account.
Section 4. Measuring time, not dollars. This is the ultimate perspective shift.
If the round number is a lie, you might logically think the solution is just chasing a bigger number, right? Like $250,000. But that just builds the exact same illusion with a slightly bigger price tag. This is where mainstream finance content often drops the ball. They acknowledge inflation, but their big solution is just moving the goalposts. They tell you that 100,000 is the new 50,000, so sprint toward a $250,000. But moving the goalposts doesn't fix the underlying psychological mistake. You are just replacing the gold picture frame with a slightly larger gold frame. The number by itself is completely meaningless until you divide it by your real-world responsibilities. Look at this comparison. One person is thriving, while the other is barely holding onto a cushion. Think about it. $100,000 for a 22-year-old with no dependents and cheap rent is genuinely enormous wealth, giving them years of unparalleled flexibility. But that exact same $100,000 for a 45-year-old supporting a family in a high cost of living city is a totally different story. When you factor in navigating soaring healthcare premiums, paying astronomical property taxes, and saving for skyrocketing higher education costs, which we know are outpacing wages, that money is barely a safety net. If that 45-year-old loses their job, that money burns up incredibly fast. It's the exact same six figures on the screen, but it has an entirely different meaning. The account balance alone tells you absolutely nothing about who is actually financially secure. Instead of tracking an account balance, we need to track coverage, because the real currency you are buying isn't dollars at all. It's freedom measured in time. This is the massive perspective shift that changes absolutely everything about how you build wealth. Stop asking yourself, how much money do I have? I'm going to deliberately slow down and repeat that because it's the core takeaway of this entire explainer. Stop asking, how much money do I have? And start asking yourself, how many months of my current life could this money cover? $100,000 that only covers 4 months of incredibly expensive city living is a very different animal than $100,000 that covers 3 full years of expenses living somewhere else. They have the exact same balance, but they offer a wildly different amount of actual freedom. When you buy investments, you aren't stockpiling dollars in a digital vault. You are stockpiling options. You are stockpiling breathing room. Knowing that you have 3 full years of runway built up gives you a deep, unshakable peace of mind that a mere account balance never, ever will. You're buying time, and time is the only thing that actually matters when the unexpected happens.
Section 5. The real starting line. This is when your money finally pulls its own weight.
Once you adopt this identity shift from dollars to coverage, you stop worshiping the milestone and realize it's actually the exact point where your money finally starts pulling its own weight. People who chase a round number as an ending usually just stop the second they see it on their screen. But people who understand this concept of coverage, they ask a completely different question. They don't ask, did I make it? They ask, what is this money actually doing for me right now? They realize hitting a baseline level of wealth is just the beginning. It is the moment your portfolio transitions from a static pile of savings into an active engine working right alongside you. Look at the math. At $100,000, a reasonable return generates $7,000 to $8,000 a year just by existing. This is the true momentum of compounding, where the money works quietly in the background without you having to lift a single finger. Think about how many hours you physically work at your day job to take home $7,000 or $8,000 after taxes. It takes immense time and energy. But when you cross this threshold and keep it invested, your money effectively acts like a second employee in your household. Imagine someone handing you $600 or $700 every single month, totally tax-advantaged, just for keeping your money invested. You don't commute for it, you don't answer weekend emails for it, it just reliably appears. That is highly meaningful momentum. But it only happens if you refuse to treat the principal as a trophy.
So, to actually build wealth and survive the hollowing out of the middle class we talked about earlier, you need to follow these 3 core rules, leaving the number alone to multiply for as long as you possibly stand it. Number 1, stop measuring your progress against inherited cultural numbers. Stop using 1990s movie culture as your financial benchmark instead of actual math. The real-world application here is to calculate your actual monthly burn rate today, right now, and use that as your target, not what some magazine tells you is successful. Number 2, start thinking in terms of time coverage, not dollar balance. Let your low expense ratio and your months of runway dictate your confidence, not the sheer size of the account balance on your screen. When you know you have 20 months of coverage, you suddenly have the confidence to take real career risks. You can breathe. And number 3, and honestly, this is the one most people find incredibly difficult, resist the urge to celebrate your milestone by spending the momentum. The real-world application for this is simple. When you finally cross that 6-figure line, go out, buy yourself a nice cup of coffee, give yourself a high five, and then leave the portfolio completely alone. Every single dollar you pull out to reward yourself for hitting an arbitrary number is a dollar that permanently stops multiplying for you. You have to step back and let the engine run.
Which brings us right back to Sarah, who calculated her true coverage, realized it wasn't a finish line, and boringly let her money keep compounding. When Sarah didn't get that magical, overwhelming whoosh of arrival we talked about, she got curious instead of discouraged. Instead of trying to force the victorious feeling by going out and artificially upgrading her lifestyle with a new car or crazy dinners, she sat down and ran the real math on her life. She looked closely at her city, her expenses, and her daily responsibilities. She realized that her $100,000 equaled exactly 5 months of coverage if her primary income suddenly stopped. Now, 5 months is great. It is a fantastic, deeply comforting safety net, but it certainly wasn't the permanent, feet-up-on-the-desk finish line she had been promised by culture. And here is the truly amazing part. When she closed that spreadsheet, she didn't feel disappointed at all. She actually felt deeply empowered. She felt a profound sense of relief and peace of mind because she was finally dealing with reality instead of hopelessly chasing a cultural illusion. So, she made the absolute smartest, most wonderfully boring decision possible. She closed the laptop, went back to work the next morning, and let her money quietly continue to compound in the background.
The number on your screen is just a single frame in a movie that's still playing, so the only question that actually matters is this: what will you do the day after you hit it? The 6-figure illusion completely relies on convincing you that the story magically ends once the final 0 drops into place on your dashboard. But life doesn't freeze. Inflation doesn't freeze. The cost of living certainly doesn't freeze. The camera keeps rolling. You have a choice here. You can either freeze the frame and blindly admire the picture while your buying power shrinks and the story moves on without you, or you can keep going. Hitting the milestone is easy to celebrate, but what you decide to do the morning after you hit it will ultimately determine your entire financial future. So, when that number finally pops up on your screen, what's your next move?